help me watch for anybody in the waiting room that needs to be admitted. Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to Diversity at Work, Changing the Goal, Why Lip Service is Not Enough. Thank you for joining us. If I may, let me take a couple minutes just to introduce myself and one of my associates, and then we'll dig into our topic today. So my name is Dan Oakland. I'm the founder of Alternative HRD. We are a human resource management and consulting firm located in Sioux Falls. Started this business several years ago, and that was after spending my first career for several years in the restaurant business, working with a national franchise. I'm one of those folks who got into the HR profession more by accident than by design, but I've been passionate about helping employers learn and follow best practices and about helping employers do right by their people. So my background actually spans about 50 years in the workforce. And during that time, I've worked with lots of employers. I've seen lots of changes, and I've worked through, I think, all of the employment law changes over the last few decades. I've seen a lot of progress in the workplace, but I can also see that we have a lot of work yet to do. Joining me today in this webinar and the presentation is Jessica Ashton, who's one of the human resource consultants on our team. Jessica has worked in the corporate world. She's worked with cooperative and nonprofit sector for several years, and now works with a variety of our clients, helping them with everything from recruiting to benefits administration to performance management. Recently, with the FFCRA and COVID-19 issues our clients face, Jessica has also been passionate about helping our clients address diversity and discrimination and harassment issues in the workplace. And she's actually been a driving force in developing our Respect at Work initiative. I think most of us would probably agree that 2020 has been a strange year. The pandemic caused havoc over all the world, and then a series of events occurred that increased racial tensions around our country to the point where peaceful protests have been replaced with looting and burning and destruction and violence. And as a result, our economy has taken a nosedive. Many of our workplaces had to close or dramatically change operations. Our schools, our churches, our favorite restaurants were suddenly inaccessible, and our lives have been disrupted in major ways. In some states, we're getting back to normal, but other states continue to experience spikes in infection rates, and they continue to experience shutdowns. Cities continue to deal with violence related to Black Lives Matter demands. And so what does all this have to do with the workplace, and why are we talking about this today? It's just this, that our people are impacted by all of these events. And some people are stressed, some people are angered, some are indifferent, some are concerned, some are panicked. And we've got events in Minneapolis and Atlanta and Portland and Seattle and Chicago, and even this week in Kenosha, Wisconsin, that have exposed continued anger over race relations. They've revealed what is perceived as lingering social injustice in America. And I think a lot of us like to think over the years our workplaces have become non-discriminatory, that race and national origin don't matter in our hiring and selection process. We like to think harassment and bias, whether based on age or gender or disability or sexual orientation, doesn't happen in our workplaces anymore. We want to believe that all of our people treat their employees and coworkers and clients extremely well. But the fact is, we have work to do in our society to mend wounds, to heal relationships, and to provide opportunities. And the workplace, in our opinion, is the best place to do that. You see, our workplaces are a microcosm of society, almost like a laboratory where we can provide leadership for the rest of our country in how to relate to one another, how to treat one another. In the last 50 to 60 years, we've made progress, but there's still a ton of work to do. And that's what we want to talk about today. So here's how I want to proceed. First, we're going to stroll down memory lane a little bit in a quick review of some of the civil rights and employee-related legislation and litigation that's impacted the workplace. Second, we want to examine a little bit what we have done in the workplace and the progress we've made, or at least the progress we think we've made. Then we'll segue into an overview of the challenges still facing the workplace, what needs to be done. We're going to shine a spotlight on the added value of diversity and inclusion in business. And finally, we'll give you some tips and ideas and tools for next steps, things you should consider for your workplace in order to do better and to do more to build an inclusive workplace based on respect for all of our people. At this point, I'm going to turn things over to Jessica. She's going to move us forward from here. Jessica?
I apologize. My PowerPoint is a little bit finicky today. But thanks so much, Dan, and thank you to everyone for joining us on today's call. As 68% of people believe that interactive presentations are more memorable, we are going to dive in with some quick instructions on how you can participate in upcoming polls we've sprinkled in throughout today's presentation. You can respond in 2 ways. If you haven't already done so, please visit the website pollev.com/jashton243 and simply respond A, B, C, or D when asked. Or you can text right now jashton243 to the number 22333. That's right, 2 2s followed by 3 3s is the number to join, and simply text A, B, C, or D when you see the polling slides on your screen. Now these instructions will also appear on top of each poll, so let's get started. Here we go. And here's our first question. How many federal employment laws are enforced by the U.S. Department of Labor? Once again, those instructions are up on top, and you can just respond with your answers A, B, C, or D. I'll give everybody a little bit of time here. All right, looks like we have some responses, and our correct answer is around 180. So actually, the U.S. Department of Labor administers and enforces more than 180 federal laws. That means there are more than 180 federal laws that employers need to adhere to as well, and that number doesn't include state laws affecting employers. And here we begin our stroll down our legislation of the past several years here. The Fair Labor Standards Act came about in 1938 and defines things like minimum wage and overtime pay and child labor. As men began to join the military in World War II and as women began to take over their civilian jobs, unions started to advocate for equal pay. It took a while, but in 1963, the Equal Pay Act amended the Fair Labor Standards Act and aimed at abolishing wage disparity based on sex. While the law changed, statistics still show, nearly 60 years later, that women make about 81 cents on the dollar compared to what men earn. Laws can change, but that doesn't necessarily eliminate the problem. The 1950s and 60s were the height of the civil rights movement. The Civil War abolished slavery, but it did not end discrimination. 8 years after Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat for a white male passenger, the largest political rally for human rights ever in the United States took place. The March on Washington is credited with helping the Civil Rights Act of 1964. In 1967, the Age Discrimination Act was signed into law by Lyndon B. Johnson. And the Rehabilitation Act had a long history which began in 1917 with the creation of a board to address VR needs of veterans with disabilities. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973 was the first law to provide equal access for people with disabilities by removing architectural, employment, and transportation barriers. In 1951, it was estimated that 40% of the migrants in the United States were illegal immigrants. Their presence in such large numbers depressed wages for all farm workers. That was unquestionable. It was argued that the only way to stop the flow of illegals was to impose harsh punishments on those who employed and exploited them. 35 years later, the Immigration Reform and Control Act made it illegal for employers to knowingly hire individuals unauthorized to work in the United States and established a system for verifying the legal status of employees. The ADA story began a long time ago in cities and towns throughout the United States when people with disabilities began to challenge societal barriers that excluded them from their communities, and when parents of children with disabilities began to fight against the exclusion and segregation of their children. The Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law in 1990 and prohibits discrimination based on disability. Throughout its history, the United States government has enacted legislation protecting the men and women who serve in times of armed conflict. During the Civil War, Congress passed legislation protecting service members from legal proceedings they could not attend due to their military commitment. USERRA, which was passed in 1994, provides many protections. Two of those protections are protection against discrimination and protection of one's pre-deployment job. In 2007, the Coalition for Genetic Fairness argued the fact that because all humans have genetic anomalies, they would all be prevented from accessing medication and health insurance. The coalition also cited the potential for misuse of genetic information. Now, you may wonder how that applies to the workplace, but have you ever had to take a physical for a job or for any insurance application? Have you ever had to answer medical related questions to enroll in benefits or to receive reimbursement for medical expenses? When those things are tied to your employer, there's a chance that your employer received confidential medical information that could negatively impact you. GINA was signed into law in 2008 and prohibits group health plans and health insurers from denying coverage to a healthy individual or charging that person higher premiums based solely on genetic predisposition to developing a disease in the future. The legislation also bars employers from using individuals' genetic information when making employment solutions. A number of cities and states have passed legislation prohibiting discrimination on the basis of LGBTQ status or on gender identity or sexual orientation. And news coming out just a few months ago included a landmark decision by the United States Supreme Court stating that an employer cannot fire an individual merely for being gay or transgender, as this violates Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. All of these laws were intended to protect people, primarily employees, from being discriminated against for what are essentially non-job related factors. With the passage of these laws, there have been and continue to be ongoing changes to how employers need to do things. Here's a quick look at the then and now. With the Immigration Reform and Control Act came the introduction of the Form I-9. This deceptively simple form has caused headaches and heartache. Minor mistakes can tally a fine in the tens of thousands of dollars. And over the past years, there have been 14 different versions of the I-9. Talk about keeping us on our toes. The Americans with Disabilities Act and lawsuits that followed have forced employers to expound upon physical requirements in job descriptions, be careful and deliberate in what is asked in the interview process, and expanded the accommodation process to include all employees and applicants. And in order to be an equal opportunity employer in complying with Age Discrimination Act, the Civil Rights Act, and Equal Pay Act, and so forth, employers are constantly analyzing their practices. This includes their recruiting, interviewing, hiring and firing, promoting, demoting, and discipline. Many gray areas have evolved, and ensuring proper attention, time, documentation, and action has become a delicate and an exhausting process. From unlawful intelligence tests to discrimination and sexual harassment to the request for accommodation, there have been many significant court cases over the years affecting employers, as listed here. And here are some more additional, more recent cases that show sexual harassment and discrimination remain top issues for businesses. Unfortunately, litigation and claims brought to the EEOC or the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission accumulate to the hundreds of thousands on an annual basis. But how employers responded? The occasional training, add some more workplace policies, or just respond to complaints as they arise. With so many different things taking up a CEO's time, like running a successful, profitable business, most employers are addressing situations as they happen, with a quick fix to tide them over to the next thing. This Band-Aid approach is reactive instead of proactive. But why is reactive bad, or at least insufficient? Because after all these years, court cases, ebb flows of social unrest that affect employers, we continue to have the same illegal situations happening. Now, you would think that with 60 years of legislation and court decisions, the problem of discrimination and harassment would disappear. But here are some staggering statistics that prove otherwise. Interestingly, the EEOC secured more than $505 million for victims of discrimination in 2018 alone. This 2019 Glassdoor study revealed that 42% of adults in the United States have experienced or witnessed racism in the workplace. Racism, that thing that we've been fighting against for centuries, continues to be a daily issue and is resoundingly prevalent in today's society. A 2017 online survey by a nonprofit called Stop Street Harassment found that 81% of women and 43% of men have experienced some form of sexual harassment during their lifetime. It went on to report that verbal sexual harassment is the most experienced form of sexual harassment by both genders, followed by unwelcome sexual touching for women and cybersexual harassment for men. A 2018 AARP study found that 1 in 4 workers over the age of 45 have been subjected to negative comments about their age from supervisors or coworkers. About 3 in 5 older workers have seen or experienced age discrimination in the workplace. And 76% of these workers see age discrimination as a hurdle to finding a new job. And perhaps even more discouraging is that another report found that more than half of these older workers are prematurely pushed out of long-time jobs, and 90% of them never earn as much again. A 2017 Psychology Today study looked at treatment of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender workers. 40% reported they had experienced bullying at work. 56% of them said that this wasn't the first time that it had happened to them. 13% said that bullying was typically found in a group setting, but most of them said that they were targeted by one person. Important thing to note, in 2017, LGBTQ was not a protected classification. So what was inappropriate bullying in 2017 is now illegal harassment. Now, we just touched, I tested this and apparently it didn't clear. We just touched on some national surveys surrounding harassment and discrimination, but it's always interesting to see how these numbers compare locally. So let's see how closely these hit home by having everyone respond via their smart devices. Your polling question is, have you ever known anyone who quit a job rather than reported discrimination or harassment, or known a person who reported it but nothing was done? Once again, those polling question or instructions are up top. You can join us at any time to poll your responses. It is important to note that things like discrimination and harassment are affecting us. Being reactive isn't cutting it anymore, and we need to alter perceptions, educate, and redefine expectations to cultivate the change that we want to see. Oh, I was really hoping that this one would work. I encourage you to respond either way. I'm just going to tell you the polling question. So we touched on a lot of compliance topics, so here's our final polling question. The question is, if the Department of Labor walked into your office tomorrow to investigate your practices, how would you fare? Now, before you register and answer, think of these questions. Would everyone who interviews applicants pass muster? Would the Department of Labor find any unaddressed grievances? Would your compensation between men and women be considered equitable? How does your workforce compare to the demographics of your community? So your question is, if the Department of Labor was to walk into your office tomorrow to investigate your practices, how would you fare? So you can respond A with, we would pass with flying colors, our compliance is top notch. You can respond with B if your response is more like, I think we're doing most things right, fines aren't that high, right? And then C would be O, and then followed by your choice 4-letter word, exclamation mark. And since we can't receive these responses, in addition to applying key takeaways from this presentation, another way to gauge where your organization is at when it comes to compliance is to conduct an HR assessment. Alternative HRD offers this service, and it involves looking at your handbook policies at your management practices, at your forms and documentation, and at your compliance with all state and federal regulations, including laws related to discrimination and harassment. Bottom line, it lets you know where you contribute to the cost of our failure to eliminate problems of bias, discrimination, and harassment. One is the monetary cost, the payout of litigation by way of fines and penalties. The annual workplace class action litigation report of 2017 stated that the top 10 employment-related settlements totaled $2.72 billion. The other cost that we have to look at is the cost of lost opportunity. This lost opportunity comes from bad and even illegal decisions. A lawyer at Seyfarth Shaw Law Firm noted that HR professionals and business executives should focus their efforts on prevention and dedicate resources to proactive compliance. Now, as if we weren't dealing with enough, enter COVID-19, the epic pandemic of our generation. So powerful, it has managed to redefine almost every aspect of our lives. How we do things, when we do things, where we do things, if we can do them. And unfortunately, the end isn't in sight. But wait, there's more. Yet another impact of COVID-19 is building momentum. The EEOC is reporting that COVID layoffs are resulting in discrimination and retaliation claims. Now, this pandemic has and continues to bring with it many challenges, but employers also need to recognize and address the societal unrest being played out at the local, state, national, and world levels, and how it is affecting their employees and business. Racial tensions and riots around the country spill into the workplace. Peers are expressing their differing opinions on hot button topics in not very respectful ways. As mentioned before, life has completely been flipped upside down for many, and the continuous change brought on by COVID has people angry, uncertain, sad, scared, and in some cases, unrelenting. Dan's gonna walk us through some tips and steps employers can take to be better in setting the tone for their organizations.
So what we've done so far in the last 50, 60 years has, in a nutshell, been reactive. We've responded, but there's more we could do. So with 60 years of history, 60 years of progress, still falling short of where we need to go, what is the next step? I think the question then is, what's our workplace responsibility? And with that comes a couple things to look at. What's the right thing to do? And what's the best thing to do for our organization? Well, as it turns out, I think the answer to both is the same thing. The right thing to do, it's not to avoid the subject, it's not to not talk about it, it's not to kind of avoid it and hope nothing happens, but it's to address it. It's our position that the workplace is perhaps the best place to address inequality, injustice, and equal opportunity. It's our position that the workplace, it's where we can learn to talk together, interact with each other, work together, and find solutions in a more effective fashion. The workplace is perhaps the best laboratory we have to help each other learn to live together as peers and coworkers and neighbors. So we have two primary responsibilities: do the right thing, treat people fairly and equitably, and do what's best for organizations. Now, you may ask how spending time and money on diversity and inclusion benefits the organization. So let me explain, because there are some documented business benefits. If we look at the business case for diversity, there are several things that have been found. When we think of diversity, most of the time it's pushed within an organization, maybe with regard to affirmative action or needing to comply with equal opportunity objectives. But there's significant business case. There's higher cash flow per employees. Deloitte's study shows that approximately a 2.3 times higher cash flow in companies that really make a significant effort in diversity and inclusion. McKinsey & Company shows a greater chance of higher financial returns when there is efforts, significant efforts in diversity. Harvard Business Review says sales are higher, revenue is higher, more customers and greater profits in businesses that have specific diversity efforts. Looking at a McKinsey Global Institute found that gender diverse organization, the financial performance is up to 15% better. Ethnically diverse organizations tend to have a stronger financial performance. For every 10% increase in diversity in executive teams, there's been at least an 8% increase in profitability. So there are financial reasons. And according to Harvard Business Review, they talk about some of the non-financial, but they say it leads to financial performance. Diversity tends to unlock innovation because of greater variety of background and experience. People come from different backgrounds, have different ideas going forth. Diversity drives market growth. This is another thing Harvard Business Review found. According to Forbes magazine, increased diversity on our leadership teams also leads to better innovation, improved financial performance. So how do we become a more proactive employer? How do we set the stage to see some of these benefits in our organization? Well, I guess one, we can maybe take a hint from Albert Einstein here. Insanity really is doing the same thing over and over, but expecting different results. So in order to expect change in others, we need to change how we do things. We need to be better. We need to be proactive. And so one of the things, or perhaps the first thing where we need to do better, is to be more aggressive in training and equipping our supervisors and managers and executives. Let's face it, in most organizations, or most small organizations especially, any training regarding discrimination, harassment, sexual harassment, diversity comes every once or every year or every 2 years in about a 45-minute session. Maybe the same with employees. Every once in a while we think, oh, we should probably talk about that. When we talk about our policy, we talk about what they shouldn't do. Our training has to do more. Most of our training has been, don't discriminate, don't harass. If someone complains, report it. We'll deal with it. But we need to train our managers. We need to teach our managers and supervisors, help them understand there are gaps in the boardroom, there are gaps in management, there are gaps in workplaces, in our demographics, in people in different positions. Managers need to understand why Blacks, why people of color, why women, why individuals with disabilities feel frustrated. Managers need to be aware of bias, perhaps their own biases and biases of other people, whether those biases are conscious or unconscious. They need to be aware of things like disparate impact, historical context, systemic racism, and why people believe so strongly that that's an issue, not only in the workplace, but in legislation. Managers need to understand the organization's strategies and plans to address these, if there are strategies and plans to address these. And so we'll talk about that as well. But leadership needs to communicate and drive home the expectations from top down, equipping our key people, our leaders, supervisors, managers with the knowledge and empower them to take proper action. We've got to not turn a blind eye to these issues, but rather face them on, talk about them. The second thing is similar to this. We've got to be more active in training our team members and having discussions about these issues. We can be proactive with our people. Most of our staff know there are problems. A lot of them are frustrated that things aren't being addressed. Properly communicating expectations, making deliberate changes to alter culture is in your team members' best interest. You know that the people in your organization have brought all kinds of opinions and biases. Some are voiced, some are silent, but they impact how your people interact, how they treat each other. And part of our role as business leaders is to set the stage, set the expectation for how our people act and behave. And to do that, we need to teach them to understand each other, interact with each other, communicate with each other, work together more effectively. You see, reinforcing the objective, outlining the consequences, and following through will not only give credibility to your supervisors, but will reignite confidence in your company, in your organization. Third, we need, in becoming proactive, we need to seek out and destroy issues and problems rather than waiting for them to surface, rather than waiting for somebody to make a complaint. How do we do that? Look, did you know 100% of people have hidden biases? Oh, I've got biases against certain types of pizza. I've got biases against certain behaviors in people. We all have biases. Some of those are maybe good biases, some are not so good biases. But biases can be negative or positive. They start forming in us when we're extremely young, as early as 5 or 6 years of age. And they're reinforced through social settings, through mass media. We need to enlighten our managers and our team members, perhaps, of the biases they have, and we need to educate them, help them find out how to examine if bias and discrimination occurs within the organization. For example, in the interviewing process, if we have several people doing interviews, yeah, they interview differently. They're looking for different things. Different things impress them. Different things bother them. And so we have to make sure that those things that do bother them aren't racially motivated or gender motivated. We've got to look and listen for issues. We've got to design questions during our performance reviews and stay interviews and ask people if they're aware of issues that need to be addressed. We can't be complacent about that. We need to be using more surveys within our organization to uncover and discover issues, not waiting for complaints to happen. Number 4, how do we become more proactive? We've got to promote and facilitate discussions. And these can be formal discussions, these can be informal discussions, but it shouldn't just be in the break room or when management's not around. Most of us have learned how to be politically correct, at least to some degree. We've sort of tried to instill in our people to be Midwestern nice and not get too political or too controversial or too personal in our conversations. But we need to talk in the workplace about bias and discrimination and harassment and diversity and inclusion, why it matters, how it manifests itself, and how we can do better as an organization. It goes back to educating our managers, educating our team members, but discussing some of these topics and helping our employees identify how they play out, what they look like, whether it's at staff meetings, maybe regular monthly meetings that you have when you're talking about what's going on in the organization. This can be a subject that can be raised and talked about. Number 5, we're seeking to diversify our workplaces, our workforce. There are a lot of legal reasons to diversify our workforce, but there's also a lot of benefits to the business to do so. Coming together of people of different ethnicities with different experiences in cities and societies can be a key driver of innovation, as we talked about a bit ago. Companies with more diverse management teams generally have higher revenues due to that innovation. A 2016 survey shows that 47% of millennials actively look for diversity and inclusion when they're looking at potential employers. McKinsey's most recent Delivering Through Diversity report said that corporations that embrace gender diversity on their executive teams are more competitive and actually 21% more likely to experience above average profitability. So how do we diversify when most everyone who applies looks like us? How do we diversify when the market seems limited? How do we diversify and at the same time hire people who will share our values? Well, it means we look outside the box. It means we look further and longer and harder at candidates. It doesn't mean we lower any type of standard. It doesn't mean we lower our qualifications or expectations, but it does mean we question our own preferences and judgments and predispositions. And we sometimes look farther and longer and harder than we may have before. And number 6, how do we become more proactive? We've got to work on that workplace environment, creating a positive, respectful work environment. How does one become an employer of choice? Well, you never stop working on culture. 94% of executives, 88% of employees believe that a distinct workplace culture is important to business success. I bet every one of you has walked into a business somewhere and you can tell within a minute or so kind of the temperature of the place, whether people are afraid to talk, whether they're willing to talk, whether they're collaborative, whether they're afraid to speak up. Employees' overall ratings of their company's qualities like collaboration and work environment and mission and value alignment. Those companies have a stronger culture. They have a winning culture, and it keeps their employees engaged and aligned and motivated. So outline the rules of engagement, encourage positive behavior, and address negative behaviors with a corrective plan. So let's recap. Number one, we've got to become more aggressive with our supervisory training. That 45 minutes every 2 or 3 years isn't enough. Our team training, our staff training, again, we need to be deliberate, not rely on a one and done mentality when trying to shift perceptions and actions. It's got to be more ongoing. Third, search and destroy issues and problems. Educate our staff, ask people about issues during their reviews, look at organizational demographics, do a deeper dive into your hiring practices, promotional practices, pay practices. Fourth, facilitate discussions in the workplace. Find out what issues your people are maybe struggling with, wanting to address. And some people, frankly, don't want to address it. Number five, diversify. Look at how you can reach further to become more diversified in your workplace. And last, create that positive work environment. Find out where your organization measures up through organization surveys. And I can tell you that in order to get a good look at your organization's culture, you don't look from the boardroom or from the C-suite. You've got to look from the break room, from the floor, and see how that culture, how that environment spreads out among your people. You can continue doing what you've been doing. You can avoid issues, you can avoid complaints, and that's fine, but it's not enough. And if your organization is serious, there needs to be executive level discussions about diversity and inclusion in the organization. There also needs to be executive level commitment towards diversity and inclusion in the organization. And that means investing time and money to do the right thing with the realization that there can be a return on investment. There's be a payoff, there'll be a rewarding benefit. Now I'm going to ask Jessica to tell you a little bit about how, if you're interested, how we can assist your efforts, to tell you a little bit about our Respect at Work initiative. Jessica?
Alternative HRD is also addressing these 6 takeaways with our newest program, the Respect at Work initiative. This engaging and interactive 3-part series focuses first on your leadership team, then the team as a whole, and wraps up with a fully customizable 3rd phase that takes a deep look at your organization, assesses needs, and develops a deliberate plan towards respect at work for your organization. Phase 1 is our Leaders Edition, which is in an approximate 2-hour session focused on open and honest discussion with your executives, managers, and supervisors about their roles, responsibilities, and liabilities related to creating and maintaining a work environment that's not only free from illegal and inappropriate behavior, but one which actively promotes respect, diversity, and inclusion. Now, this session is just a starting point to catapult your Respect at Work efforts. Ongoing communication and feedback is still needed as the workplace and leaders evolve. Phase 2 is a 60-minute session for the entire team. They need to know that their leaders have their best interests at heart. They need to know how they can expect to be treated and how they are expected to treat others. They need to know that your organization takes these matters seriously and takes them seriously. We also introduced the workplace CPR to the whole team in this phase to direct and reinforce best practices to encourage respect at work. This training gives key information, but once again, it's a starting point to get the ball rolling and conversations started. Organizations still need to be deliberate in ongoing efforts to reinforce what is learned. And finally, phase 3 is a strategic challenge, which is fully customizable to the level and extent the businesses want to develop their company's respect at work policies. We take a look at where you're at and where you want to be and help you devise a plan to reach your ideal respect at work culture. For details, pricing, and scheduling of the Respect at Work initiative, give Alternative HRD a call, and we'd be happy to help.
So Jessica and I would like to thank you for joining us today for Diversity at Work, Changing the Goal. It's just the bottom line is there's more we need to do. There's more we have the opportunity to do in our workplaces. So this last slide has our contact information. I encourage you to reach out if you have any questions or inquiries. It's got you can follow us, you can like us, you can tweet us, but you can also pick up the phone and call us or shoot us an email. We'd be glad to visit. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Appreciate you being online. Thank you very much and good luck to you. Bye.